Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on the Coaches Parley, ASTV Productions. I've got the overtime crew with me. Mike Stackhouse, Harry Mahesh. Good afternoon. Good evening, gentlemen. It's starting to feel more like softball, baseball, and soccer season. Mike is currently awaiting picking up the kids from the playground as they are playing some softball action. And Harry and I probably wish we could hit some baseballs instead of being stuck in some sort of code red / I don't know what we want to call this anymore. 15 months. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, you know what? It's interesting. You're not allowed to play actual games. You have to break off in groups of 8, and you have to be 3 miles apart or whatever it is that they say that you have to be. But by and large, it's been fun. I coach under 19s. And the daughter that I'm picking up tonight is an under 14. And it's actually wonderful. There's not a mask in sight. And, I mean, the coaches are very creative about how they're doing the drills and following the rules and maintaining the quote-unquote safety. But it's awesome. And I ran my first practice last night with the under 19s. I was really nervous about how I was going to do it because it's not normal, obviously. But I was pleasantly surprised at how much fun the girls had. And it put a much needed smile on my face. I'll tell you that.
Harry and I still can't meet in a private place, but we can meet publicly for some weird reason. I don't know why, but we'll just call it at that. Let's get jumping right into this, boys, because it's overtime action. Speaking of last bit of junior hockey that's going on for some of the Western Hockey League players, the U18s are wrapping up yesterday, actually, is the time the show's starting. Canada, Russia playing in the gold medal final. The Swedes winning 8-0 over Finland to capture the bronze. 3 underage players. Now, these aren't just, little players to be thinking about. Obviously, Conor Bedard lighting it up as a double underage. Shane Wright lighting it up as an underage. And Denton Mateychuk, who was part of the taxi squad, if you will, with the U18 squad. He's actually been playing in 3 or 4 games here in this U18 Frisco, Texas action. Harry, what have you liked about the Canadian team that you've seen thus far? And does Conor Bedard, is he the greatest U15 player to play thus far in Canada?
Well, I think going into this game, he's got the 2 points per game average, just same as McDavid. But I think McDavid finished with 14-7, and he's at 12 at 6. So I haven't checked the box score yet. I don't know if he's got any.
He's got one tonight or he's got one in the final for sure. I don't know what else he's got, but
yeah. So I mean, I guess, but does it really matter to be the greatest U18 player of all time? Like up until going into it's a great tournament, but I mean, I think when it comes time to World Junior, that's kind of where we start, defining the greats of Canada. But I mean, this is a huge accomplishment. But just out of I was interested, so I clicked on some of the the leading scorers all time for U18, and you see some big names, like guys who are good NHL players on that list. So it's obviously means if you do well in that tournament, it could turn into a really good NHL career.
Yeah, I mean, you look at currently the Russian leader, Mateychuk. He's going up to try to challenge Alex Ovechkin's 14 goals or 14 points in the same amount of games. So, I mean, Alex, clearly one of the best goal scorers in the history of the NHL. Austin Matthews, Pasternak, McDavid. That's just rattling off the last, great players in the last 10 years. So, Mike, have you been really we talk about these U15s and these U16s that are part of this program. Does that really set a tone for what we have seen or haven't seen in junior hockey from these players? And how exciting is it to see, the fact that players from Ontario are actually able to play in competitive hockey this late in the season, even though they haven't had a season?
I think for me, and maybe it's because Conor Bedard is from the West and he plays for Regina, which isn't far from me. But I'm just amazed at this kid, and I know there's a lot of hype, but I actually think he's even better than the hype, if you can believe that. And like, yeah, I mean, you said he's a double underager. I mean, I think he plays for Canada at the World Junior Championship this December.
Wow.
I think he's going to. He's that good. I think he's going to.
Now, why is it now another Connor that's off this roster is Connor Geekie because he played for the Winnipeg Ice. But do you think he was invited to this? Do you know, Harry, if he was invited to this? And if not, why do you think he should be playing or should be very close to playing with this squad next year?
Well, we coached against him. He started the year off with Verdun, so I got to watch him up close. And no, I mean, I knew he was good watching him, you know, kind of in the MJ. But the way he took off this year for the Ice was awesome to see. I mean, he was more of a kind of a third line younger guy with Verdun who was very deep, and then to step into the role he did. I don't know if he was invited. I don't know if it was a tryout. I think they just announced what the team was.
Right, yeah.
But you know, for his sake, things worked out really well for him in the bubble. And I mean, again, to be a double underage is pretty rare. So I think him being left off doesn't really mean it's not a slight by any means with this roster.
No, absolutely. I mean, he could be there next year, no doubt. I mean, like you said, being a single underage, he's definitely got the skill. He's definitely got the size at 6'4". I mean, he's got some pretty good bloodlines with his two brothers ahead of him. So look for big things for Connor Geekie, that's for sure. Mike, have you seen Denton Mateychuk play at all in the bubble this year? And if so, you haven't seen him much. And
no,
consider the kid is from Manitoba, but I mean, here's a kid that gets onto a taxi squad, but then shows his presence in the games that he's played. Solid, not that big, he's just under 6 feet tall, but players like that get a taste of junior hockey, global world junior hockey, does that just give them that much of an upper edge into the coming years, and having that pedigree, so to speak, to be looked at for U18s, U World Juniors, and other Hockey Canada programs?
I think it probably does, but I think the other thing for me, like, and maybe it's just me, and maybe, because there hasn't been a lot of hockey at the junior level this year to really talk about, but does it seem that there's more hockey prodigies that are young than normal? Like, does it seem that there's more? Like, I mean, we rattled off 3 or 4 names there, when usually I feel like we might be talking about one. And I mean, I think Bedard is, I think, a generational talent, but these other guys that we're talking about aren't terribly far behind him. In fact, if there was no Bedard, I mean, I don't think it's fair to compare anybody to Bedard from what we've seen of Bedard, but it just feels like that there's more prodigies or special players, if you will, that are, like 15, 16 years old than what I remember seeing in the last maybe ever. And I don't know. And maybe it's, like I say, maybe it's because we haven't been, we haven't had hockey really. And so we're just, the exposure is more, but it feels like we're in the middle of a really amazing era where we've got some really special young teenagers playing hockey.
So, Harry, I'm going to throw that question right to you, because you're scouting, you're watching this talent. Is it because there isn't competition in the way we've seen in previous years that we're seeing more individual talents being shown off more with less pressure of making playoffs, or having that ability just to leave it all out on the ice in 60 minutes and build from that?
Well, I also think the fact that we haven't really seen junior hockey at this level in a while, it might look not better than it is, but it's kind of, you put the shade on these guys for 6 months and then they pop up and you're like, oh wow, like, for example, we're talking about Conor Bedard. Shane Wright is an underage captain of this team, so like, what is that, like, how do you even playing in the Ontario League? I think his exceptional year, he was right around Connor McDavid's pace, and then he gets shut out of the Ontario Hockey League, makes Team Canada. I think he missed a couple games, but he had about 6 goals and I think his first 3 games. And yeah, this guy was a captain, and he's he's going to get drafted this year. And yeah, I mean, rightfully so. Like, Conor Bedard is an amazing player, but I think Shane Wright might have got a little bit of a slight with this guy who's we're talking about an 04 and an 05. Like it's crazy to think how these guys are creeping up. And I mean, Shane Wright's gonna have a full year next year in his draft year, and it's just gonna be like I think this guy is gonna be the guy who's gonna make the World Juniors next year and really popping. And Conor Bedard's gonna be, I mean, I don't know, World Juniors, and I don't know the year Crosby made it. He might have been I think he might have been his grade 12 year. I don't really remember. But I mean, it would be great to have them both. I mean, to have 2 Canadians come up a year apart, I think would be huge. But in terms of prodigy, it's funny because I've been watching this Cole Caulfield, and I'm a big fan. Like, the guy lights it up. But then you get to the NHL, and we all remember the NHL it's a different league. Like, all these guys come up as at some point the best player at their age, somewhere around the best player to make the NHL. And then you get there, and even though he's doing really good, I think with 3 goals in 7 games, like, that's great, but it's not, it's not out of this world. So it's you see a lot of great players come up, but I still think the NHL is leaning, and they're going to realize that using the American League to develop these players is a really good strategy. And like, it came out of the lockout in 04. That's when you got that 2002 draft year with the Getzlaff and the Perrys and the Eric Stahls and Spetzas, when they all had that extra year in the American League and then went on to have a great career. So I think these guys are going to realize that lighting it up in the American League and then stepping the NHL might be the way to go.
We'll leave that for the first period. Great discussion so far, gentlemen. Like I said, the U18's wrapping up here this week. Let's get it to the second period right after the break. We're going to talk about draft exposure, but also how the draft implications are going to look, considering that some junior programs aren't even thinking of having a draft or delaying their draft for the 2006. So stay with us here on the Coach's Parlay. Rarely we get an overtime second period, but it's almost like playoff style with the 3 of us. And with that second frame comes our second discussion point. The draft structure is starting to take shape here for the 21 season. We already know that the first week of December we'll have the MJ and the WHL drafts. But in terms of the SJ, the AJ, and the BC, now the BC Junior Hockey League is no longer with the CJHL, but still having Hockey Canada ties. Any idea how this draft will look for the next 6 months or so before the new year hits?
Well, I heard
No.
the MJ is pushing theirs to the end of the year now. So it's going to be at the end of the season, yeah. So, I mean, I think ultimately for the Western Canada, it makes sense to have it your minor midget season. So, I mean, you know what? I thought I was going to be behind the 8 ball stepping in here and trying to watch players, but by the time next September rolls around, people start watching kids at age 13. So you have a decent idea of where to start. There's going to be a lot of showcase camps. Those pop up every weekend all over, in every province. So I think, it'll be overwhelming. Some players might get overlooked, but at the same time, some guys who, might have not been on the radar might pop up, after this shortened season.
So, I mean, have you heard any news, Mike, of the Alberta Junior and BC Junior even having dates? Because I'm looking and I haven't found dates online whether or not they're even having a draft for this 21 year.
Well, they don't have drafts in BC and Alberta.
So therein lies another wrinkle, Harry, saying how are these teams then going to participate? And now that the BCHL is now a part of Canadian Junior Hockey League, how does that change their process of getting players?
Well, I don't know if it's a concern, is if players from the other provinces can now leave without having to, clear any sort of, trade or waiver, as if, they were just similar as if a player here wanted to go to the NA. You can just pack up and leave, and then, we lose a player. I know there are some transfer agreements like with the US, that are in place where, if you lose a player, there's financial compensation if it's a signed player. But if there's no structure for them in terms of what the rule is, I mean, if I have a guy on my roster, who's from out west who says, this team wants me, I'm just going to play here. Like what? I don't know how that's going to go about. Hopefully there is a rule where, they can't just pluck players who are already on Hockey Canada rosters. I don't think that would be allowed anyways, but I'm not sure. I mean, I think their process of getting players will probably stay the same. Like we talked about before, like the best players who are available will look to go that way anyways. In terms of quote unquote poaching players, that's been happening forever. So I'm sure it's, they'll just find a way to kind of do it as it normally was.
Ryan Wood, a friend of ours, who's normally on the show with us, always has been very vocal with regards to getting rid of juniors and just saying, let the best players get picked up, let them go where they need to go, and develop teams as such. Mike, do you see this being the beginning of that process, or do you still think there is evidence that a draft is important for, the leagues that use a draft system?
I think that there's still going to be a fair bit of uncertainty with financial viability with some of these junior A teams, and not just not just in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, but everywhere. And I think Sean mentioned it during the last show where the BCHL is breaking off, but are they looking to create a bit of a super league and lop off some of their weaker franchises? I think for me, I'm just kind of taking a sit back and wait and see approach on this, because even before the pandemic, we had junior teams, doing the pay to play model and things like that. And so I don't know what this is going to look like, post pandemic for most of the teams. So, I mean, I think you're probably already looking at, a situation where, if Yorkton doesn't have a pay to play, but Kindersley does, they've already got an advantage. They've already got it. So, I just think there's a lot of uncertainty for me. Like as far as the SJHL and their Bantam draft, because those players are they don't step into the lineup, for a couple of years. There's no harm in putting that off and having it at the end of the year, as Harry mentioned. I don't think that there's no harm in doing that. But I think, when you're can you lose players to the BCHL? Can they poach them? Well, as Harry said, they're, at times they poach them anyway, whether there's an agreement or not. So I don't anticipate that changing either. What I am curious to see is, if there isn't, if the BCHL is treated the same as the USHL or the NAHL, and I mentioned this on the last program, if you're an MJHL team, if you're the Swan Valley Stampeders, and you got an 18-year-old leading your team in scoring with, 18 points through 9 games, and the BC, you got a team in BC that could use a scorer. Is it as simple as them making a phone call? They poach your top player in a way. I don't know. Like, that's what I'm going to be watching is because to me, you break off from the CJHL, fine, but if you're still a member of Hockey Canada, they're not going to be able to do that. So in which case, what are they really gaining here by breaking away from the CJHL? If anything, if I'm an SJ or an MJ team, I'm more than happy that they broke away, because if you look at the World Junior A Challenge, BC would put, 9 or 10 guys on that team. So you just freed up 9 or 10 guys for players from my league. So I'm happy that you're gone. And the same would be true with the top prospects game as well. You're just, go take your ball and go play somewhere else. That's fine. You're opening up more spots for guys from my league, and it actually makes it a little bit easier for me to recruit, because now I can say, well, look, in the SJHL last year on Canada West, we upped our player numbers from 1 to 6. Because there's no BC, players on the team. And if And if the Canada West team still does well and wins gold without any BC players, even better.
Would you expect a BC team to put in their own individual team then and have the other 3 remaining Prairie provinces do their own?
I wouldn't let them. You don't want to be part of the CJHL? You don't. No, I don't care what you do. You're not being a part of our group. Go away. And
then at the same time, if you have Alberta kids playing in BC, then are they eligible for that because they're not representing, their right province? But I mean, in terms of the draft, I mean, if I draft a player, the second he graduates high school, he can go anywhere he wants outside of Manitoba. So that's the only restriction he has. The biggest impact this would have is if BC does what the Western League does, and they can kid a kid from Alberta in grade 11 or grade 12, or kid from Saskatchewan grade 11, 12. Like if they're getting players, out of high school, then that's going to start to hurt our leagues in terms of the top guys. But that being said, I always feel like players who are ready to step into junior at that grade 11, 12 age are usually on Western League radars as well. A lot of those guys might go there, and if a kid's thinking college, then then what, at that age they might leave, and so it's just another kind of hurdle. But that's if they're allowed. I don't know. The Western League obviously has a totally different rule. Like you can have a Canadian kid in high school go down to the States and play if he's been drafted. So that would be the biggest threat, I guess, to the other 3 provinces is if high school kids can now leave to go play junior hockey in BC.
That transaction as well as that compensation will be the administrative side of things that are talked off the ice for the preparation of the BCHL not being a part of the Canadian Junior Hockey League. We'll leave it at there, gentlemen, for period 2 or the second overtime frame. We're going to switch gears. We're going to go to the professional side of things only because there's some black eyes being thrown, some punches being thrown, not that we've seen for almost 10 or 12 years. So we got to discuss this because I know you guys definitely have an opinion on it. Stay with us here on Coach's Parley. Welcome to Pilot Mountain Hockey Academy, your world-class academic and hockey training facility created to maximize each student's athletic and academic potential. Blackjack Stewart Arena, home of the Buffalo, is inside the 46,000 square foot complex, as well as a curling rink and other facilities. The students have a unique combination of successful, well-rounded education at Pilot Mountain Collegiate Institute and the professional hockey training in an encouraging community. The years of experience of on-ice coaching propel our students to the next level, both mentally and physically, in a professional environment.
Can we break? Are we allowed to break?
We just took a break right now, Mike, but we're going to keep going unless you got to keep driving, unless you allow your 15-year-old to drive in Saskatchewan. I don't know if it's allowed or not. I know we used to do that back on combines and stuff.
Well, Yorkton isn't Winnipeg, but
I've seen a lot of 14-year-olds around Pilot Mountain driving combine in other areas too. Some of that community service work done by the Hockey Academy won't get them in trouble nonetheless. But
well, if you can hear me and don't mind how this looks right now, I'll keep talking. I just might not look into the camera.
Because I know you've got something to say about this next topic. Let me tell you, as much as it's old-time hockey or not old-time hockey, a good pal of ours, not really so, but call him a hockey player, call him a goon, call him what you will, tough-nosed guy, Tom Wilson, decides to Raggedy Ann and Andy Dahl, 2 players from the New York Rangers earlier this week, gets a $5,000 fine, flexes without his jersey, gets in trouble, doesn't get in trouble, gets let off the ice, leaves the next game against the Rangers, and then the Rangers decide to fire their 2 top brass men, including John Davidson, as well. The NHL has now fined the Rangers $250,000. Through all of this, I got to know from both of you gentlemen. Let's start with you, Mike. What is your opinion with the last 72 hours of what's happened between the Rangers, the NHL, and the Capitals?
Well, I'm always concerned in society when people are penalized for the words they say. And don't kid yourself, those 2 guys on the Rangers were fired because of the statement that came out that was very critical of the, well, what do they call it? Player safety or the discipline department or whatever. That's why Jeff Gorton and John Davidson are fired. Don't kid yourself there. I mean, I'm pro fighting. I have said, when it comes to hockey, do you want to see what happened the other night, which was 6 fights, nobody turtled, everybody was willing to go? Or do you want to see Marty McSorley hit Donald Brashear over the head with a hockey stick? Or do you want to see Bobby Clark break Valerie Harlamov's ankle with a slash? I want to see you know what? Fighting is a lot safer to settle a score than the other options if you don't have it. So to that end, I've got no problem with it. But, I followed along on social media the other night, and here's my thing with it. Everybody's outraged, and they say they don't want this in our game, and it's a black eye, and so on and so forth. Well, if that's true, why do the Boston Bruins run Brad Marchand out there every single game with the behavior that he's had? I mean, he licked another player. To me, you can't get any more disgusting than that. So when the Boston Bruins talk about Tom Wilson and the fact that he shouldn't be in the league and Brad Marchand should be, right? And I could go through, the league, and I could find other guys. I mean, how long did Matt Cook play? And if it's so bad, where's the union on all of this? Like, if the union really cares about player safety, why are they looking out for the one guy that's hurting everybody and ignoring everybody else that seems to be getting hurt by him?
Couldn't agree with you more. Mike, Harry, give us your 2 seconds, 2 minutes worth on the same topic, please.
I mean, I was surprised they let him play the next game, to be honest. That just kind of seemed like a no-brainer to at least suspend him for one. But, I mean, I don't know who it was on the Rangers who gave him the flex back in that second game, and then he got a 10-minute misconduct. So it's one of those things where you sound like a kid saying it, but it's like, well, he did it, and he didn't get punished. And, so, I mean, I've been in that situation before. I'm not the biggest guy. If you grab somebody who isn't a tough guy, like, there's definitely a line out there. I mean, yeah, we all know Panarin's good. We can always use that example. If that was McDavid or Matthews or Scheifele, or any team would be losing their minds. So, I mean, he got off the hook pretty easy. And the thing is, like, they say he's a repeat offender. He's not. I don't know where, like, he is, but I mean, your reputation counts for something. So it's like, but the weirdest thing for me is, like, in a world where you have to literally defend everything you say, the NHL can do whatever they want and they never back it up. Like, just give us a reason as to why. Like, you can shut everybody up if you have a good explanation, but you just say it's a fine for roughing or whatever it was on not even Panarin, on the other guy. So I don't know. It's weird that they can make an announcement and punish everybody, but there's no reasoning behind how they come up with those numbers. And
this would have been Tom Wilson's 6th potential suspension. So he is, like, you consider the other, I believe the last suspension he had was like 5 or 6 games. Everyone's asking for the head of George Paris, the head of director of player safety, which I don't agree, because if you knew George Paris, first of all, he's an educated man from Princeton. Second of all, he was a fighter, but he wasn't a goon. And like Mike said, there's a place for fighting. There's not a place for breaking an ankle with a slash or tomahawking somebody on the top of a head with a hockey stick, like we saw with Todd Bertuzzi. I forget the gentleman from Colorado, but nonetheless, those instances should not occur. And yes, the game gets destroyed in that aspect. But because we don't have the enforcers on everybody's team, these plays, when they get shown, are larger than life. And we seem to cry wolf on every way, shape, or form. Mike, agree with me or disagree with me the fact that if there was an enforcer on the Rangers, this wouldn't have happened in the first place?
I don't know, because Tom Wilson's pretty tough. Usually the incidents that don't happen are because of guys that know that they can't back up what they do, in the event that they're challenged. Tom Wilson can back up everything that he does. I'd have had a problem with this, I suppose, if the Rangers, the next night, started all those fights. If nobody on Washington wanted to fight and they all turtled, then it's like, you know what? I think we have to come to the understanding that there's no fighting. The Capitals don't want to fight. It's a real black eye for the sport to have the Rangers chase them around the way that they. But you know what? It was almost like the players on the Capitals they knew it. They knew that, you know what? We're going to have to answer for this. It's not going to be pretty. And we're going to have to stand in there like men. Heaven forbid you be a real man nowadays. But we got to stand in there and answer the challenge. And they did. And again, at the end of the day, nobody was hurt. But you know, the Rangers obviously feel like scores have been settled or whatever the case may be. And you know, I come from you know, old school hockey. I wish Winnipeg would had a little bit of this spunk in them, because I do believe that it does bring a team together when you have, you know, an incident like that where Panarin goes down, and Harry's been part of teams before where, you know what, your best player is probably your least popular player on the team. You know that your team is basically going nowhere. You're in 5th place, and your best player is fit as lunch, and you know that the right thing to do is to stick up for him, but you think, you know what, I ain't coming to that guy's rescue. I mean, you know, we've all been part of that group, right? And you guys are laughing because you know it's true.
It's true.
And so,
absolutely.
And so I like that, because, you know, the Rangers aren't going to make the playoffs. They've got really nothing to gain, but it did bring their group together. And when I compare it to the team that we all watch with Winnipeg, I don't see any of that care. Like, you know, if this happened to Mark Scheifele, are there 6 fights the next night? I don't think there is.
No, Mike, it did happen last year in the playoffs when Mark Scheifele got taken out with Tkachuk, whether you believe it was a egregious tackle against the glass or if it was unintentional. Call it what you want, 6 in one, half dozen the other. Nobody came to Scheifele's rescue last playoffs. And I agree with you that person is missing from several rosters. I'm going to switch topic just real quick here, because we've talked about the fact that 2 of the head staff in the Rangers were fired. What is the reasoning behind sending $250,000 from the Rangers to the NHL?
Well, I think I think it tells you how mad the league was. I think the league told the owner and Glenn Sather, you guys are getting fined up the wazoo, and fire those 2 guys. So they did.
The Senate mob that is called the owners of the NHL win this one.
I mean, you look at, I mean, people can say what they want, but Ron McLean didn't host Hockey Night in Canada for a couple of years because his interviews with Gary Bettman were challenging, right? So the NHL, they control the message, and if they don't like their own people taking them to task in a public relations sense, they're going to bring down a hammer. And you know, that Ranger statement, as much as I can say I supported it. I guess if you look at it from the point of view of how the NHL is being played today, even though I had no problem with the fights, I also had no problem with the Ranger statement. I mean, pick a lane, right? I think is what I'm saying. And so, you know, the NHL head office clearly felt embarrassed, and they want those 2 guys gone. They're gone. It's that simple.
It was funny when Brendan Shanahan had that role. They even made this spoof video at the NHL Awards, because he'd come out and he'd say so-and-so player suspended because of this and this, and he would do it. But since then, like, I mean, yeah, I'm a Peros fan, like, you know, but he doesn't explain anything. So to put in perspective, Nathan McKinnon gets the same fine for underhanding a helmet at a player as Tom Wilson does for what he did. Like, Nathan McKinnon is essentially getting the same. Yeah, like, hey,
didn't Connor McDavid get one too, just like that?
What you did was equally as bad as what this guy did. And if you show the 2 clips side by side, you'd be like, well, he lobbed the guy's helmet back at him. Like, yeah, did he get him in the chest? Yeah, okay, like, I mean, I laughed. I mean, if that happened to me, I would be furious. But at the end of the day, if it was their best player, I mean, I know at the end of the day, I would laugh at it. And you know, and you look at. Yeah, anything compared to a $5,000 fine. Buchnevich gets a 1-game suspension for that high stick. The same guy who was getting ragdolled the night before. And it's like, you know, it's a referee got fired for trying to police a game. Remember those comments that he made?
When
He
the
was
mic
trying
was
to
left on, the hot mic comments, absolutely.
You're telling me
And he
George
was
Soros-
canned, right? Again, he
Yeah.
was canned because he embarrassed the league. He wasn't canned because he was wrong. He was canned because the league didn't like to be embarrassed.
So in
And
a
that's
situation like this,
that's a good example. I forgot about that. And I mean, I don't think. I mean, I'm obviously you guys know how I am, but I think it's a bad look to fire people because they tell the truth.
well, everybody was up in arms because like refs shouldn't police the game, like it shouldn't be that way. And here on the opposite, everyone's saying just suspend him for one game. It's the smartest thing you could do. Suspend him for one game. Police the game by not letting him play. He got pulled out of the game by his coach. Like like when your coach says, you know what, this could get bad. How does the league, the head of safety, not? I mean, I don't think he just didn't notice on the schedule who they were playing next. I mean, I don't know. But going back to the thing before is like, I was in that situation where something bad happened, and I was like, okay, Harry, you got to go get him back. It's like, did the Washington Capitals win any of those fights? Did Matt Cook beat up Steve Moore? A lot of times you think, oh, he did something bad. It's just as easy as going to beat that guy up. Like, no, it's not easy to just beat people up. A lot of times, like that poor guy, when they lined up and those three forwards said, okay, we're going to fight. And that defense was looking across at Char going, please, like, no. And you saw Char. He looked at both those guys. It's like, people think it's easy, like, oh, yeah, payback. But it's like, I lost a lot of sleep thinking, tomorrow night's the night. Okay, probably around the first period. And it's, your team respects you. Like, I love that feeling after. I love the feeling before when, you lock eyes at a teammate and they would just know. And I sound like, I don't want to sound like a dinosaur saying that, but within that room, what it does is you can't put into words. Yeah, it's barbaric and it doesn't make any sense and it's against the rules of what we think is normal. But in that room, the New York Rangers are going to look back at this year and say, that's something we'll remember. Like, not Panarin getting hurt, but they're going to have a team year-end party here in probably a week and a half, and they're going to have some beers and talk about that. And poor, what was it, Brendan Smith? Like, he did the smart thing. He went right at him. He didn't even let him drop his gloves, square up. That's all you can do. You know what I mean? But
it reminds me of the old slap shot with the Chiefs versus, Ogie and Screaming Buffalo and all the other guys that they lined up, that first melee, like lining up winger versus winger. And it's just going to be an ultimate Donnybrook. That's all you got to say. And that's just how it happened.
Do you remember, gosh, it's over 20 years ago now. But remember when Claude Lemieux put Chris Draper through the boards and knocked out all his chicklets and
97 playoffs, I believe it was.
Right? So then I think it was Darren McCarty come to the rescue, and Darren McCarty's a tough guy, and Claude Lemieux held his own.
Yeah.
Right? And so Harry's right. It's not just like, oh, well, go beat that guy up and pay back. And which is kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning. Like, does it happen? Tom Wilson's a tough guy.
Blake Wheeler didn't get the best of Tkachuk when he stepped into.
No, right. So I mean, there are some guys, like Ulf Samuelsson used to run around and do that, and then he would hide, and you could never get him back. He was a coward, and he had a great way of always avoiding the payback. But some of these other guys that I've talked about, Matt Cook, Claude Lemieux, I always felt Brooks Orpik was bad and dirty too. Adam Foote, I always thought was dirty. Sean Avery, but those guys were all tough, and I don't think any of them ever hid from anything. Right? They were what I would call dirty, but then if someone called them out and challenged them, they answered the bell, and often did fine.
Yeah. Breakaway time, gentlemen. I got the last comment for both of you. Playoffs are right around the corner. The Jets have just locked in and taken their playoff spot. They've just finished winning 1 and losing 7 before that. Would you rather take health or a winning streak into the playoffs? I'm going to ask both of you gentlemen before we say goodnight. Start with you, Harry.
I guess I'll go health. I guess it depends on what the winning streak or losing streak is. But, I mean, we've seen it time and time again. It's, the Jets lose Scheifele in game 1 and then game over, right? So I think the way this year's playoff goes, there seems like there's going to be a good break between the last game and playoffs. So for me, if you can have your entire lineup available day 1, I mean, especially with playing in your own division, like, you know how you measure up against that team. Like, you know, you've played them enough now. It doesn't matter if you've lost to another team 2 or 3 times. Like, your head-to-head record will look something like 5-4 or 8-2. You know, you'll know if you're in a tough series or not. So health goes will get the nod for me.
Mike, yourself.
I want to be winning. If I'm winning, I'm quite probably already healthy. And if I'm not healthy, I don't need to be healthy if I'm already winning. Healthy will just be a bonus in the event that I go through a slump and lose a couple of games later in a series. Then I know that I can maybe put that player who has been on the sidelines and ordinarily would get in the lineup but can't because he was hurt and I was winning without him. Then I can, put him in and maybe jumpstart my team a little bit. I always want to be winning, always. I've never been a fan of, you don't see it so much in hockey, but, in football where, they sit all the regulars, or baseball where they sit all the regulars and they coast into the playoffs because they say they want to be healthy. Winning is contagious, but so's losing. And if you go into the playoffs and you don't have an edge, you're behind the 8 ball, and you can be behind the 8 ball really, really quick. And so I always want to be winning, and health would be great. But if I'm winning, I'll take winning. And I don't think the Winnipeg Jets are going to win anything. And there's a good chance that they also won't be healthy. So they're not going to have either one. But if they were winning, the worst, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but if they happen to, after that 7-game losing streak, if they happen to, what have they got, 5 games left? If they happen to win 4 of the next 5 and look pretty good going into the playoffs without Nick Ehlers, I know he's probably your best winger, but if you've got continuity going, I'm not putting him in until I need to put him in. If I'm winning without him, I know I'm going to lose at some point. So I want to win, and then when I lose, I'll put him in. But I want to at least finish what I got going with my current group. And the Jets did do that a little bit earlier in the year when they kept Dubois on the wing. So I always want to be winning. For me, winning is there is nothing that I will take over winning.
Mike takes winning, Harry takes health, but Mike at the same time says if I'm winning, I'm probably healthy as it is. For the coaches, Parley, gentlemen, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time and the effort tonight. Catch us every second Friday here on ASTV Productions. For Harry Mahesh and Mike Stackhouse, gentlemen, have a great evening. Happy Mother's Day to all the wonderful moms, the glue that keeps the hockey together here in Canada and all over the world. Thanks for watching. And, of course, bringing more goodness to the greatness here on ASTV. Have a great evening. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. Bye-bye for now.